Can everyone see that? I can't believe technology hasn't gotten better in the last few years. So, for our research project, we looked at who killed game design research, and really we were interested in doing a narrative review of alternate timelines, looking at how game design research evolved in taking a case study of a different timeline and how it differed from our own. So, in today's presentation, I'm going to give you a background to the study. Talk a little bit about our methodology, which is using portals as a timeline research method. Talk about some findings and some conclusions that hopefully we can draw and help us strengthen game studies here in the year, I don't know, 2150 or something. So the background, we looked at the timeline, alternate timeline 2569b.3. As we all know, in that timeline, game design research died out in its infancy. Obviously, there was a lot of debate about this. I think it's useful to take that as a case study and see some of the issues that occurred there and how we might avoid them in the future and maybe how our timeline might differ from that. So we investigated some of the different scenarios that we identified as key factors within the demise of game design research within the timeline. These included shifts in academic priorities at the time, individualized approaches that led to a dispersion in the field, the game design research wars of 2043, which obviously were a major event that have been covered in depth by other scholars, and also the lack of a community in that timeline. So the methodology we used, or the method, was the portal as timeline research method as outlined by Cultima in 2044. So we used a narrative review and combined this with Cultima's timeline approach, and we used one of the ACU Temporal Portal Corporation technology portals, which allowed us to move about through timelines and not just through space. Not just through everything. Four-dimensional travel through that portal. We sent 500 graduate students to gather temporal data, and we had a really high return rate of 13 that returned that completed the narrative review. Despite the issues in the portal technology, we feel this is a very high return rate, which exceeds what we might expect for this technology at this time. So here is the timeline. As you can see in 2569b.3, the shift in academic priorities happened between 2020 to 2030. This led to a fracturing and individualized approaches into 2030 onwards, eventually leading to the game design research wars and a lack of community that persists in that timeline to this day. So the first shift in academic priorities, neoliberalism emerged as game design researchers were establishing the field. So the field was quite unfortunate to kind of start to come to fruition and start to mature in this time. And unfortunately, it failed to appeal to game studies crowd who thought it wasn't kind of cool enough or exciting enough, or wasn't maybe dealing with the topics that they were interested in. It was shunned by HCI and design studies as it was kind of too cool and interesting. And then it also failed to connect with academia and industry, which led to a lack of external sources citing and referencing the information generated. Another factor that happened was the methods and approaches that emerged in the 2020s led to a dispersion of game design research into a number of different directions, with each senior academic taking their own approach that led to a splintering as opposed to a consolidation of the field. And it became very difficult for newcomers to understand or establish themselves. A lack of textbooks, seminal academic sources meant that there was kind of constant debate, which eventually led to the wars. As we're aware, is being covered on the Amazon Microsoft Global TV streaming platform. The game design research wars took place in that timeline in 2043, which involved game design researchers from various factions fighting an all-out war. Following which, and kind of leading up to that, even before the wars, there was a lack of community, but especially after the war, the community never fully formed. And this led to the Digra God Emperor outlawing game design research soon after the wars to save game studies the embarrassment of future arguments within that field. So in conclusion, by examining this timeline, we seek to highlight the importance of sustained academic focus and ensuring that in our timeline, we continue to work in the same direction and support and build up one another. We also advocate for proactive measures to ensure the continued evolution and relevance of game design research as a scholarly discipline. And finally, we conclude that it's a good thing we're not in that timeline. My references are there, and I thank everyone for listening, and I direct you to the full paper for more information on the data gathering.